Get out of here!
Officer Ryan Martinez snarled at the steps, his voice slicing through the quiet morning air. The crowd froze, a few phones hovering mid-air. Martinez blocked the way, eyes burning with hostility, his posture dripping with authority. He shoved forward, feeding on his own power, while the onlookers fumbled, some with mocking smirks, others with uneasy frowns. Humiliation was on full display, staged like a ritual. Authority first, questions later. Our subject is Kesha Williams, dressed plainly, clutching a worn-edged briefcase, unnervingly calm. She looked small against the courthouse stone, yet her eyes never lowered. Her breathing stayed steady, like someone trained to stand firm in a storm. And then, something shifted out of script. She knew every step of this staircase better than anyone here, and the name engraved on that door wasn't just for decoration. Before this day was over, the roles would reverse. The cameras would tell a different story. And the very woman Martinez tried to silence would be the one deciding his fate. That morning, Judge Kesha Williams, dressed in plain clothes, clutching her worn leather case of court documents, climbed the courthouse steps. But before she could pass through the grand bronze doors, she was stopped. Martinez, his eyes dripping with contempt, stepped in front of her. He sneered, calling her a rat crawling out of the ghetto, then suddenly slapped her across the face. The sharp crack echoed through the air. Kesha's head snapped to the side, her briefcase flew from her grasp, and legal papers scattered in the wind like torn fragments of dignity. Before she could recover, he had his hands around her throat, slamming her back against the cold stone wall. The metal cuffs bit into her wrists until her skin broke. Around them, a few other officers gathered, laughing, pulling out their phones to record as if it were sport. Through the pain, Kesha's eyes never left the brass plaque above the entrance. The Honorable Judge K. Williams, presiding. The irony burned deep. Only a few steps from her own courtroom, she was being humiliated by the very system she had devoted her life to serving. Inside, Martinez straightened his uniform, smoothed his chest, and inhaled deeply, like a man who had just completed a familiar ritual. This wasn't his first performance. He'd played this script before. Turn himself into the hero, turn the victim into the criminal. The system had long learned to believe a police officer's word above all, especially when the person on the other side looked like Kesha. Your Honor, he began smoothly, his tone rehearsed 100 times. While conducting a standard security inspection, I identified a suspicious individual attempting to infiltrate the courthouse. He pointed at Kesha, sitting at the defendant's table, wrists cuffed, a dark bruise swelling on her cheek. The presiding substitute judge that day, Judge Harrison, a thin man in his 60s, nodded approvingly. Martinez continued weaving his fiction. The suspect failed to present identification, behaved aggressively, shouted, and resisted as I conducted the search. From the back row, two other officers, Rodriguez and Thompson, exchanged glances. They'd heard this script before. Same lies, different target. Martinez pressed on eagerly. She also claimed to be someone important, said she was a lawyer, even a judge. But we're used to those kinds of impersonations. These people always think they can cry racism to dodge accountability. Judge Harrison leaned forward. Did the suspect resist arrest? Yes, Your Honor, Martinez replied confidently. I was forced to use minimal necessary force to ensure public safety. His hands trembled slightly, the only crack in his flawless performance. The court clerk's keys clacked, transcribing each lie. In the corner, a young female assistant frowned. Something about Kesha's face gnawed at her memory. Prosecutor Sandra Walsh, a steely middle-aged woman, stood up. The prosecution calls Officer Rodriguez. The officer rose briskly. Yes, Your Honor, I witnessed the entire incident. The defendant clearly attempted to bypass security. Officer Martinez acted with complete professionalism. Martinez quickly added, producing a phone video, conveniently starting mid-scuffle. while his body camera had malfunctioned that morning. "How convenient," Kesha murmured, her voice steady but simmering with restrained fury. Still, Martinez pressed the act of a righteous hero. This is a textbook example of a lawbreaker pretending to be a victim. She carried classified documents bearing court seals, clearly a sign of forgery or theft. "We suspect attempted fraud." Judge Harrison frowned. "Fraud?" Thompson jumped in. "Yes, sir. She may have intended to impersonate a court employee." The irony in the room grew suffocating, for it was Kesha herself who had signed those very documents. Martinez waved a hand dismissively, confident of victory. "This is nothing more than an attempt to exploit racial tension to deflect blame. I exercised restraint. A lesser officer would have used far more force." Judge Harrison nodded gravely. "Your professionalism is duly noted, Officer Martinez." In the defendant's chair, Kesha sat upright, hands folded neatly on her lap. Her face was calm, almost serene, but those watching closely could see the faintest curve at the corner of her lips. Not of submission, but of certainty. She knew that every lie would soon exact its price. Kesha silently noted every falsehood Martinez uttered. Every distortion, every falsified fragment, stored carefully in her mind like bullets, waiting to fire back. The officer had no idea that the handcuffed woman before him had the power to end his entire career. "Anything you'd like to add, officer?" Judge Harrison's dry voice echoed. Martinez puffed his chest. "Only this, Your Honor. Incidents like these remind us why we need strong law enforcement. Some people only understand authority when it comes with force. The defendant has learned today that every action carries consequences." He had no idea those words would soon become his own curse. Prosecutor Walsh smiled smugly. "Your Honor, the prosecution rests. The evidence clearly establishes a pattern of unlawful and defiant behavior." Martinez stepped down, glancing at Kesha one last time. He winked, a gesture of arrogance, convinced he'd already won. He didn't know it yet, but this was the last moment of glory his career would ever see. "The defendant may present her statement," Judge Harrison announced, certain this would be a mere formality before sentencing. Kesha rose slowly. The soft clink of her cuffs echoed across the chamber. Despite the swelling bruise on her cheek and her disheveled hair from the assault, she radiated the commanding poise of someone born to stand in judgment. The stillness in her stance made the courtroom stir uneasily, as though everyone felt something was shifting beyond control. "Thank you, Your Honor," Kesha began, her voice clear and unwavering. It wasn't the plea of a defendant. It was the confident tone of someone who once ruled this very room. She started dismantling Martinez's wall of lies, brick by brick. "According to the officer's statement, I was accused of unlawful entry. In reality, I was merely walking on the public sidewalk adjacent to this courthouse at exactly 8:47 a.m. She paused, eyes locked on Harrison. "Your Honor, I believe you're aware of the Supreme Court's ruling in Hague v. CIO, which explicitly affirms that public sidewalks adjoining government buildings are traditional public forums where citizens possess a constitutionally protected right to be present." The court stenographer stopped typing. Walsh frowned. This wasn't the emotional outburst she had expected. It was a precise, methodical legal argument, unfolding with measured rhythm. Kesha pointed toward the stack of papers on the evidence table. "The documents he called suspicious? They are legal case files, judicial memoranda, and administrative correspondence. I have authorized access to them as part of my professional duties." "And what duties would those be?" Harrison interrupted, skeptical. Kesha smiled faintly, her eyes glinting. "Williams, Dr. Williams. And we'll return to my professional background shortly, Your Honor." A chill rippled down Martinez's spine. She continued, her voice steady and clear. "He claims I shouted and resisted arrest. I exercised my Fifth Amendment right, neither confirming nor denying. But let me emphasize, any reaction on my part was a direct response to an unprovoked act of violence, carried out without warning or legal justification. From the back row, the young female clerk suddenly stood up, a look of recognition dawning on her face. Kesha's tone hardened. As for the so-called malfunctioning body camera, Your Honor, this courthouse is equipped with a comprehensive surveillance system with HD cameras spaced every 15 feet. Furthermore, all body cam data is automatically backed up, regardless of device condition. I formally request that the court issue a preservation order for all electronic evidence between 8:45 and 9:05 a.m., including courthouse footage, body cam data, and cell phone recordings from all officers present. Martinez's face went pale. He had forgotten about that kind of evidence, the kind that doesn't lie. Walsh sprang up. Objection! The defendant cannot just demand evidence without legal counsel. Kesha turned sharply, her gaze cutting through the air, forcing Walsh to step back half a pace. The Sixth Amendment guarantees the defendant's right to self-representation, and Brady v. Maryland established the prosecution's duty to preserve and disclose potentially exculpatory evidence. I'm merely reminding you of that obligation. The courtroom fell silent. Harrison cleared his throat. Ms. Williams, you seem remarkably well versed in legal procedure. Have you had formal legal training? Kesha straightened, her hands still cuffed but her posture unwavering. I have some experience, Your Honor. Her voice was calm, but her eyes carried the quiet authority of someone who'd spent decades commanding this very room. She stepped to the evidence table and held up an identification badge. This is my court schedule. It shows I was scheduled to preside here at 9 a.m. This is my judicial access card. And this, she raised another item, is my official ID. Henderson, the longtime courthouse security guard, froze. Recognition dawned, draining the color from his face. The woman Martinez had called a sewer rat from the ghetto was Judge Kesha Williams herself. Henderson suddenly stood, his expression stricken. He had seen her every day for 3 years, and now the truth crashed over him. Your Honor, Kesha began softly, her tone composed but resolute. I believe there has been a grave misunderstanding concerning the person Officer Martinez assaulted this morning. She pulled out her leather wallet and raised it high. The gold seal of the judicial scales gleamed so brightly that even those in the back row could see it. Perhaps, she said firmly, we should recess to verify my identity. The courtroom froze. Judge Harrison stared at the wallet, then at Kesha's face, then turned toward Henderson, who nodded, pale and trembling. The court will recess for 15 minutes, Harrison declared hoarsely. The gavel struck down with a thunderous crack, a sound that seemed to bury the entire room in stunned silence. Martinez felt the floor beneath him fracture. The game he thought he had already won had just become a chess match played on a board whose rules he never knew. In the small chamber behind the courtroom, Kesha sat calmly. Henderson fumbled with the keys, his hands shaking. Dear God, Judge Williams, I'm so sorry. I didn't recognize you without your robe. They dragged you in like a suspect. It's all right, Henderson, Kesha said gently but firmly. You're not at fault, but I need you to do something for me. Anything, Your Honor. Go to my chambers. Bring me my black robe, the one with the gold trim, and Henderson. Her eyes locked on his. Bring the gavel engraved from my swearing-in ceremony. Henderson nodded frantically and rushed out as if his life depended on it. Kesha closed her eyes, inhaling deeply, centering herself, as she had learned to do through 23 years on the bench. In just 15 minutes, she had gone from a symbol of justice to a handcuffed victim, accused, humiliated, and violated. But once she donned that robe again, she would return to her rightful place, the guardian of the scales of justice. Her phone vibrated relentlessly in her pocket. Dozens of messages from her clerk, Janet. Your Honor, the Peterson hearing is in 30 minutes. The attorneys are asking about the delay. There are rumors. Please call back. Kesha typed quickly. Postpone Peterson. Clear the afternoon docket. There's something more urgent. She scrolled through her contacts and called Chief Judge Margaret Carter, head of the entire judicial district. Kesha, my God, we heard something happened. Are you all right? Not exactly. Kesha replied evenly. Margaret, I need you to do something immediately. No questions asked. Of course, anything. Order courthouse security to preserve and duplicate all surveillance footage from 8:45 to 9:15 a.m. Every angle, every recording, multiple copies stored separately. A pause on the other end. Kesha, what on earth happened this morning? Kesha replied, her voice calm but sharp as a blade. An officer named Martinez stood in that courtroom an hour ago, swearing he had detained a dangerous criminal attempting to infiltrate the courthouse. That criminal was me. He struck me, called me a filthy animal, said I belonged in a cage. Silence, nearly 30 seconds of it. Oh my God, Margaret breathed. Do you need me to call the FBI? Or the Department of Justice? Not yet, Kesha answered evenly. Right now, I just need the evidence preserved. And Margaret, I want a full audit of every case Martinez has testified in during the past 5 years. Consider it done. But Kesha, you can't handle this yourself. There's a conflict of interest. In 10 minutes, Kesha interrupted. I'll walk back into that courtroom wearing my robe. Martinez will learn exactly who he attacked, and more importantly, who now holds the power to decide his fate. Henderson returned, carrying a garment bag and a small wooden box. Kesha slowly unzipped it, letting the black fabric drape over her shoulders like familiar armor. Each fold seemed to whisper of 23 years sworn to defend justice. She opened the box and lifted her gavel, engraved with the words, "Justice is blind, but she sees all." Justice is blind, yet she sees everything. Holding it in her hand, Kesha felt the full weight of the system and of the reckoning she was about to deliver. Henderson, she said, her eyes aflame, when we return, I want you to make the formal announcement. Yes, Your Honor. How shall I address you? Kesha straightened, the bruise still visible on her cheek, but her expression unflinching. The Honorable Judge Kesha Williams, presiding. All rise! Henderson's voice thundered as the court reconvened. Chairs scraped back in unison. No one dared hesitate. This court is now in session. Presiding, the Honorable Judge Kesha Williams. The words struck like lightning. Martinez froze, color draining from his face, red to white to sickly gray. Harrison stammered, backing away from the chair that, as it turned out, was never his to occupy. Walsh's mouth fell open. The rear doors swung wide. Kesha entered. The black robe trimmed in gold shimmered under the overhead lights, the wooden gavel firm in her grasp. Her stride was measured, steady, the walk of someone who had ruled from that bench 1,000 times before. The courtroom was dead silent. Every pair of eyes followed her, realization dawning, dread thickening. Kesha took her seat behind the bench. Her gaze swept across the room, over pale faces, over disbelief, over guilt. Officer Martinez, she said, her voice low but resonant, echoing with authority. Remain exactly where you are. Martinez went rigid, his stomach twisting as nausea rose in his throat. Your Honor, Harrison began weakly. We didn't know. Enough, Judge Harrison. Kesha's tone cut through like ice, sharp, commanding, yet controlled. From this point forward, I'll be presiding. Thank you for overseeing proceedings during my absence. You may return to your own docket. I'll handle the rest personally. Harrison practically fled, his robe fluttering behind him like a shadow chased by fear. All attention turned to Kesha, who now faced Martinez, stripped of arrogance, trembling before her. Officer Martinez. Kesha's voice was cold steel, deliberate, unhurried. Roughly 2 hours ago, you took an oath and gave testimony in this very courtroom. Do you recall that? I, Martinez stammered, words failing. Allow me to refresh your memory. You stated, and I quote, These people always pretend to be lawyers, judges, or officials to escape accountability. Do you remember saying that? He swallowed hard and nodded. You also claimed I was just another professional agitator, that you'd seen this act many times before. Is that correct? The tension in the room was suffocating. Even the hum of the air conditioner sounded like a growl. And then, Kesha lowered her voice, every word deliberate, every syllable an execution. But your most memorable line, officer, was this: "Every action has consequences." Martinez's knees buckled, his hands trembled uncontrollably. Kesha reached beneath the bench and lifted a tablet. "I'd like to show you some new evidence." A soft tap. The screen came alive. Footage played from security camera number 7, positioned at the courthouse entrance. The video was crystal clear. Kesha, in plain clothes, walking calmly up the steps. Martinez stepping into her path, blocking her way. His voice rang out, echoing through the courtroom. "Another gutter rat trying to sneak in." A collective gasp swept through the gallery. The footage continued. The vicious slap, the violent chokehold, the sound of handcuffs snapping shut. And finally, the words that silenced the room completely. "Animals like you belong in cages, not in courthouses." The sound sliced through the air like a blade. A few spectators rose quietly and slipped out, unable to bear watching. "Do you see me shouting? Do you see me resisting?" Kesha asked, pausing the footage, her gaze fixed on Martinez. He was speechless, his entire career collapsing in front of him. "Now," Kesha continued, "let's move on to the body cam footage you claimed was malfunctioning." She tapped again. Another window opened, this time marked Body Cam Backup Unit 021. The system had automatically uploaded the file. From the speakers came Martinez's own voice, harsh and unmistakable. "This one thinks she can walk into my courthouse? People like her need to learn their place." The courtroom erupted in stunned silence. Prosecutor Walsh hastily gathered her papers, desperate to distance herself from the disaster now engulfing Martinez. "Rodriguez! Thompson!" Kesha called their names sharply, her tone leaving no room for evasion. "Would either of you like to revise your statements?" Both men began inching toward the door. But the screen behind Kesha was merciless. From Martinez's own body cam, the brutal assault played out in irrefutable clarity. "This," Kesha said, pointing to the frozen frame, "is the exact moment Officer Martinez committed criminal assault against a federal judge." The words "federal judge" dropped like a hammer. Martinez's knees buckled. He clutched the prosecutor's table for balance, color draining from his face. "And there's more!" Kesha opened an audio file. Thompson's voice filled the courtroom. "Man, this one's really making a scene. She might actually be somebody important." Rodriguez's voice followed, dripping with disdain. "Important, my ass. Look at her. Martinez knows what he's doing. Probably just another welfare case." Then came laughter, crude, callous, layered over the sounds of violence. The courtroom froze in collective disgust. Kesha set the tablet down. "You asked for proof of my employment? Here." She gestured toward the brass plaque behind her, the judicial seal embossed above the bench. Then to the nameplate before her, and finally the framed portrait of her own face hanging proudly in the courthouse lobby. "I have presided over this court for 23 years. Every case you've ever testified in, every search warrant you've requested, every piece of evidence you've submitted, all of it has passed under my jurisdiction." Martinez stammered, voice cracking. Your Honor, I didn't know." "Didn't know," Kesha repeated, each syllable deliberate and cold. "You didn't know because you didn't care to look. You saw a black woman and assumed she had no authority. You thought you could crush her beneath your badge." She leaned forward slightly, her voice tightening with fire. "But there's something you didn't know, Officer Martinez. For the past 6 months, I've been working with the Department of Justice and the FBI on an internal investigation into misconduct and racial bias within this police department. And this morning, you handed us the most perfect piece of evidence we could have ever hoped for. The courtroom went utterly still. Kesha lifted her gavel, letting the light catch the engraving. Justice is blind, but she sees all. Officer Martinez, she said softly, you told me that every action has consequences. You were right. Bang! The gavel slammed down like thunder. Martinez collapsed into his chair, gray-faced, staring at the wreckage of his career, his future dangling by a thread, awaiting the final cut. When the hearing reconvened 20 minutes later, the courthouse buzzed like a storm. News had spread through every corridor. Lawyers, clerks, bailiffs, even journalists packed into the room, desperate to witness what was already being called the most dramatic reversal in the courthouse's history. Martinez now sat in the defendant's chair, no longer the enforcer, but the accused. His uniform was wrinkled, his expression hollow. A public defender, hastily appointed, sat beside him, glancing helplessly between his notes and his ruined client. Kesha Williams returned to the bench. Her composure was absolute, calm steps, steady breath. But the room saw her differently now. Not merely as a judge, but as the living embodiment of justice reclaimed. The woman standing there, the one who'd been assaulted hours earlier, now stood as the symbol of everything the system claimed to uphold. And she looked straight at the trembling man before her. "Officer Martinez," she began, her voice carrying the full weight of 23 years on the bench. "Before we proceed with the criminal charges you now face, I believe everyone present deserves to understand exactly who you assaulted this morning." She rose, stepped out from behind the bench, and addressed the packed courtroom directly. "I am Judge Kesha Williams. I have presided over this court for 23 years. In 2001, I was appointed by Governor Richardson and unanimously confirmed by the state Senate. Not a single dissenting vote. I graduated with honors from Harvard Law School, where I served as an editor of the Harvard Law Review. Before taking the bench, I spent 8 years at the U.S. Department of Justice Civil Rights Division as a federal prosecutor." Her voice grew stronger with each line. Every fact another blow landing squarely in Martinez's chest. His public defender scribbled frantically, glancing up as if calculating prison time. "For 8 years, my focus was on police misconduct, civil rights violations, and racial discrimination. I successfully prosecuted 47 officers for abuse of power. And in the 23 years I've served this bench, I've presided over more than 15,000 cases, from petty theft to capital murder. I have heard every excuse imaginable, every justification ever crafted." She stopped directly before Martinez, who now sat slumped, breathing raggedly. "But in all my years of service," Kesha continued, voice steady but searing, "I have never encountered a case so perfectly emblematic of everything broken within American law enforcement as you, Officer Martinez." The courtroom held its breath. "When you called me a gutter rat, when you said I belonged in a cage, when you slammed me against the wall of this courthouse, you didn't just assault a citizen. You assaulted a woman who has spent her entire life bringing men like you to justice." Kesha turned back to the bench. Before her lay a thick stack of documents. She opened the first file, each turn of the page punctuated by the dry, deliberate crack of paper slicing through silence. "These," Kesha said, lifting the thick stack of binders, "are the complete case records for every trial in which you've testified over the past 5 years, 43 in total. In 28 of those cases, the defendants were people of color. In 26, you were the arresting officer. And in nearly every incident report, you used the exact same phrasing you used about me this morning: suspicious behavior, resisting arrest, posing a threat to officer safety. The same language, the same script. Over and over again." She snapped the binder shut. The sound cracked through the courtroom like a gunshot. "You had no idea, Martinez. For the past 6 months, I've been working with the FBI, the Department of Justice, and the Office of the Attorney General on a federal investigation into patterns of misconduct and racial bias within this department. And your name," she said, eyes locked on him, has been on the federal watch list from the very beginning. Every communication, every arrest report, even the language you use, has been analyzed. A ripple of shock swept the courtroom. Martinez's attorney stopped writing, staring at his client with a look that was equal parts pity and dread. "This morning," Kesha continued, "you handed us, with your own hands, the clearest, most irrefutable piece of evidence any prosecutor could ever hope for." She raised her gavel. "You assaulted a federal judge in the course of her duties. You did so out of racial animus. Your own words confirm it. And then, you committed perjury in open court." The gavel hovered mid-air. "This morning, you asked me if I knew my place. Allow me to clarify that for you." Her voice deepened, steady and resonant. "My place is here, on this bench, ensuring that justice is served. My place is to hold men like you accountable when they abuse the power entrusted to them. And my place, Officer Martinez, is to make certain that this morning marks the last time you will ever use someone's skin color as a weapon." Bang! The gavel struck, reverberating like thunder. The courtroom trembled. No one saw Martinez as an officer anymore, only as a man stripped bare, his badge now a symbol of disgrace. Kesha opened another file folder, a yellow one this time, her gaze cutting through him. "Now let's review your distinguished career, shall we?" She flipped a page. "According to internal records, in 15 years of service, you've been the subject of 47 formal complaints, averaging more than 3 per year. Complaint number 1 from 2009. Mrs. Rosa Delgado, age 63, reported that you verbally abused her, then slammed her face against a squad car for asking to see your badge number. Conclusion: insufficient evidence. How interesting, because this morning we saw video proof of you repeating the exact same behavior." She turned another page. Complaint number 12, 2012. Jamal Washington, 17 years old, honor student. He alleged that you planted narcotics in his backpack after he refused to inform on his brother. Conclusion: insufficient evidence. Martinez began to wheeze, sweat glistening on his temple. Complaint number 23, 2016. Dr. Michael Johnson, a respected cardiologist, arrested in front of his own home because you decided, and I quote, "A black man couldn't possibly live in that neighborhood." He spent 6 hours in custody before being released. And the conclusion? Once again, insufficient evidence. The courtroom erupted in low murmurs, heads shaking, faces hardening in outrage. But the most revealing part is this. Kesha gestured toward a large chart displayed on an easel. A red laser pointer swept across its columns. In 15 years, you've made 251 arrests. Of those, 189, that's 87%, involved people of color. Yet the demographic of your patrol area is 42% white, 31% Latino, 27% black. That disparity, Officer Martinez, is not coincidence. The laser glided across the next figures. In cases involving non-white suspects, you used physical force in 63% of arrests. Against white suspects, 12%. The murmurs turned into sharp whispers of anger. And one last number, Kesha said quietly. Of those 1,089 arrests of people of color, 432 were later dismissed for lack of evidence, procedural misconduct, or constitutional violations. That's nearly 40%. She lowered the pointer. Her eyes locked on Martinez, whose ashen face seemed carved from stone, cracking under the weight of truth. Anything to say for yourself, Officer Martinez? When a police officer has 40% of his cases dismissed for constitutional violations, she said, voice steady but cutting, we no longer call that a mistake. We call it a pattern of criminal behavior. The courtroom was silent. Only the clack of reporters' keyboards punctuated the air, like the ticking of a countdown clock. But we're still not finished, Kesha added softly, her tone almost conversational, which somehow made the tension even sharper. I also reviewed the financial impact of your career on this county's taxpayers. She held up another chart. In 15 years, this county has paid out $2.3 million in settlements and legal fees directly connected to your conduct. $2.3 million, Officer Martinez. That's more than the annual operating budget of several small towns. Martinez's voice cracked, trembling. Your Honor, I was just doing my job. Your job? Kesha cut him off, her tone cold as steel. Let me remind you of the oath you took when you became an officer. She opened a document and read aloud, her words crisp and deliberate. I swear to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of this state, to remain faithful to the law, to perform my duties with fairness and integrity, to the best of my ability. So help me God. Kesha slammed the stack of papers shut. Fairness and integrity, Martinez. Not selective fairness, not fairness filtered by skin color, not integrity shaped by personal prejudice. She stepped out from behind the bench, facing the entire courtroom. What we've witnessed here today is not just the misconduct of one officer. It is the inevitable product of an entire system, a system that protected, concealed, and paid to keep silent. A system that believed it could forever shield those who abuse their power. Her gaze turned back to Martinez. But this morning, that system failed, because you chose the wrong person to assault, and now, everything is exposed. Martinez bowed his head, burying his face in his trembling hands. Officer Martinez. Kesha's voice dropped, resonant and controlled, echoing through the chamber. Earlier today, you told me people like me need to know their place. Well, now it's time you learned yours. And your place, she raised the gavel, is in that defendant's chair, facing the full consequences of 15 years of criminal conduct. Bang! The sound exploded like thunder. The packed courtroom fell completely silent. Journalists leaned forward, frozen. Court clerks didn't dare move. Kesha stood tall, her robe spreading like armor forged from justice itself. Her voice carried, not just to sentence a man, but to speak to the system. Officer Martinez, she said firmly, before I pronounce judgment, let me remind everyone how this morning began. With a question. What happens when a man with a badge believes he stands above the law? When unchecked power becomes the belief that he can assault a federal judge at the very door of her own courthouse? Her eyes swept the crowd. The answer, she said, is right in front of you, because standing here is the living proof. No one is above the law. Not the police, not the prosecutors, not the judges, not the politicians, no one. Martinez broke down, his voice cracking between sobs. I'm sorry. I didn't know. Kesha looked down at him, her eyes flickering briefly with pity, then steeled again. Sorry? You had 15 years to be sorry. 47 complaints you ignored. Dozens of lives broken under your abuse of power. And you apologize only when you're caught, by someone who can finally hold you accountable. This apology, Officer Martinez, is 15 years too late. She raised her gavel, the light catching the engraving. Justice is blind, but she sees all. You asked me this morning if I knew my place. Here's your final answer. My place is here, defending people like Rosa Delgado, Jamal Washington, Dr. Michael Johnson, and hundreds of others you trampled. My place is to ensure that what happened this morning is the last time you or anyone else uses the color of a person's skin as an excuse for violence. The gavel came down with a deafening crack, like thunder ending an era of impunity. I deliver justice not just for myself, Judge Williams declared, her voice filling every corner of the room, but for every family that ever watched helplessly while a system looked the other way. Officer Martinez, this morning you told me to know my place. Now I will tell you yours. My place is to make sure bullies like you never again hide behind a badge to destroy innocent lives. Bang! The court sentences you to 25 years in federal prison without parole. Martinez collapsed, sobbing uncontrollably as the room held its breath, but Williams wasn't finished. I hereby order a federal investigation into every case you've ever touched. Every arrest, every report, every complaint dismissed or ignored. For the victims who were silenced for 15 years, justice will finally be heard." Her words sliced through the air like light cutting through darkness. Then, suddenly, applause. It started softly, then grew until the room shook with it. A 5-minute standing ovation for the rebirth of justice itself. 6 months later, the shockwaves of that historic morning spread across the nation. Martinez sat in a federal cell, stripped of badge, pension, and freedom. The man who once inspired fear in an entire community now lived under protective custody, tasting the same helplessness he had inflicted on others. The federal probe unearthed a web of corruption. 12 officers dismissed, 4 commanding officers indicted, the department placed under direct federal supervision. All 432 cases linked to Martinez were reopened, freeing dozens of wrongfully convicted citizens and resulting in nearly $9 million in compensation, paid directly from the police budget. The name Judge Kesha Williams became a national symbol of integrity. She traveled the country speaking at law schools, teaching judicial ethics, and reminding young lawyers, justice delayed is justice denied. But when justice finally arrives, it arrives for everyone. The courthouse where it happened was renamed the Justice Williams Federal Courthouse, its bronze plaque reading, "Here, justice found its voice." More importantly, the community changed. People who once lived in fear began to speak out. Civilian oversight boards were established. Police training programs were rewritten, with Judge Williams personally designing the curriculum on constitutional rights and implicit bias. The footage of her sentencing became the most viewed courtroom video in internet history, over 50 million views. Comments poured in from around the world. For the first time, we saw justice fight back. Rodriguez and Thompson, the 2 officers who laughed while she was assaulted, were federally indicted. Their case used in police academies as a study in institutional corruption. And Ryan Martinez, once convinced of his own untouchability, now sat in a concrete cell, haunted by the moment he thought he had humiliated a woman with no power. He had been wrong. Because sometimes, justice doesn't just wear a blindfold. Sometimes, justice wears a black robe, wields a wooden gavel. And when the time comes, she strikes back. This story isn't just about a fallen officer or a courtroom reversal. It's a reminder that power only matters when it's used to protect, not to humiliate. Ryan Martinez believed he could decide someone's worth with a slap, a shove, a pair of handcuffs. But in the end, the same hand that once strangled others was the one chained by the very system he abused. While Martinez used power to oppress, Judge Kesha Williams used wisdom and courage to restore faith in justice. 2 people, 2 choices. One believed he stood above the law. The other became proof that no one does. Justice may be silent. It may arrive late. But when it stands up, it sees everything. What about you? Do you think our systems today are transparent enough to prevent the next Martinez? Share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to help spread the message that real justice still matters, because the next story could be yours.